Generally speaking, book value has got nothing to do with the price at which you should repurchase your shares. Intrinsic business value does. And the correlation between intrinsic business value and book value throughout the investment universe is there's virtually no correlation. So book value is unimportant in most companies. It actually has reasonable tracking utility. At Berkshire, our intrinsic business value is very considerably above book value, and we have signaled that. We'll say it right here. We said it before, but in addition, we've signaled that by saying that we would repurchase our shares as long as we had a substantial cash balance and met all the needs of our operating companies at 120% of book value, and if we got the opportunity to buy it there, we would probably buy a whole lot of it. The calculus is very much what I put in the report. You take care of your business with money first, and if you can buy additional businesses, it's something where you add to the per share value of the business. You do that. If you can repurchase your shares at a significant discount from intrinsic value, it's like buying dollar bills at 90 cents or 80 cents or whatever it may be, and it's a very sure way of improving per share value. It's been very difficult for us to do it because every time we announce it, people say, well, if he thinks it's worth more than 120% of book.
If those cheapskates are willing to pay that.
Yeah, right. Well, if at least one cheapskate is willing to pay that. And they're right. And we don't really, we've got mixed emotions on it. We don't really like the idea of running a company where it makes most of its money by buying its partners out at a discount. But if partners want to sell out at a discount, we also like the idea of buying and making sure money that way. We haven't done much of it. Most of the time, our stock has sold in a reasonable range in relation to intrinsic business value. We would think that probably a fairly significant percentage of the time in recent years it sold at least some discount. There were a few years when we thought it sold for more than intrinsic business value. But if in our opinion, in the director's opinion, the stock is selling at a significant discount and we've got the money around and we've got the stock offered to us in reasonable quantity, we will buy it. And there could be circumstances, it's unlikely, but there could be circumstances where we would buy a whole lot at a price that would be attractive for the stockholders who stayed in. Charlie?
Nothing to add.
We usually feel we're paying too much, isn't that right, Charlie? But we find the business so compelling, and the management or our associates so compelling that we gag and we get there on the price. But there is no perfect mathematical formula. Looking back, when we bought wonderful businesses that turned out to continue to be wonderful, we could have paid significantly more money, and they still would have been great business decisions. But you never know 100% for sure, and so it isn't as precise as you might think. Generally speaking, if you get a chance to buy a wonderful business, and by that I mean one that has economic characteristics that lead you to believe with a high degree of certainty that they will be earning unusual returns on capital over time, unusually high. And better yet, if they get the chance to employ more capital at high rates of return. That's the best of all businesses. And you probably should stretch a little. Charlie and I have had several conversations where we were looking at a business which we liked, and we're sort of gagging at the price, and Charlie or I will say, let's do it, even though it kind of kills us to pay that last 5%. We did that with See's Candy, and Charlie was the one that said, for God's sakes, Warren, write the check. I was the one that was suffering. But it's happened quite a few times, hasn't it, Charlie?
It almost always happens. Modern prices are not cheap.
No. And great businesses, you're not going to find lots of them, and you're not going to get the opportunity to buy them. And although you do in the market, the stock market will offer you opportunities for profit percentage-wise that you'll never see in terms of negotiated purchase of business. In negotiated purchase of a business, you're almost always dealing with someone that has the option of either selling or not selling, and can sort of pick the time when they decide to sell and all of that sort of thing. In stock markets, it's an auction market. Crazy things can happen. You can have, some technological blip that will cause a flash crash or something, and the world really hasn't changed at all, but all kinds of selling mechanisms are tripped off and that sort of thing. So you will see opportunities in the stock market that you'll never really get in the business market. But what we really like buying businesses to hold and keep. We like buying cheap marketable securities too, but particularly when you've got lots of cash coming in and you're going to continue to have lots of cash coming in, you really want to deploy it in great businesses that you can own forever. Charlie, anything?
No, we're sort of in a different mode now, and that has a great lesson in that if we'd kept our earlier modes, if we'd never learned, we wouldn't have done very well. The game of life is a game of everlasting learning. At least it is if you want to win.
We want to win.
Have you ever considered moving to Omaha to be closer to corporate headquarters?
Oh, I think the answer to that is no.
I'm sure the answer to that is no. Now, our partnership works extremely well, and even though we're somewhat technophobic, we have gotten to the point where we can handle using the phone, and don't push us beyond that.
No, we've never learned anything beyond the phone.
But we actually, as a practical matter, we each know exactly how the other guy thinks, so that we don't really even need the phone exactly. We used to do a lot of phoning back when it cost a lot of money to phone. Now it doesn't cost anything to phone, and we don't talk to each other hardly. Charlie has a lot of fond thoughts about Omaha, incidentally, as do I.
Yes, although as I said earlier on this weekend, they are rebuilding it so rapidly now that I feel like Rip Van Winkle. They've torn down so many of the buildings I remember. It's amazing how much Omaha has changed the last 5 years.
Well, you have to remember that a third of the lifetime of the country has passed during our lifetime, so you have to expect a little change occasionally, Charlie. If you go back far enough, we did a reasonable amount of short selling, and I've certainly identified lots of companies that I thought were far overpriced, and I've identified a fair number of companies that I not only thought, but I was virtually certain were frauds. And so, Charlie, we've been seeing them ever since we got in the business. But making a lot of money short selling still is not a game that appeals to us over a long period of time. It's one of those things that
we don't like trading agony for money.
But we wish you well. George Bush issued probably the 10 greatest words of economic thought in history. Most people don't give him credit for that. They think of Adam Smith and comparative advantage and Keynes and animal spirits and all those guys. But George Bush went out there in September of 2008 and said, if money doesn't loosen up, this sucker could go down. I mean, that is a man that knew how to get to the point. And I give him great credit for it, enormous credit. And plenty of members of his party did not agree with what he was doing. But, we owe him a lot in that respect. And, our leaders, generally speaking, of both parties, once they were in the terrible trouble, I think have behaved or came up with policies that in general were very useful in avoiding something far worse than what we experienced. And they weren't easy to do. I mean, they took some guts. So I am disturbed by a national debt that grows in respect to GDP. In fact, I wrote an article in the New York Times, an op-ed piece in 2009 or 2010, talking about this very problem. But, we came out of World War II with a debt higher, a gross or net debt higher in relation to GDP than we have now. And people were predicting terrible things at that time because of that situation. And the country has done sensationally. The real danger is that it just continues to grow and it gets easier to print money than exercise some discipline. But we've encountered far worse problems than we face now. I mean, this is not our country's toughest hour by a huge margin, and I think we will do fine, but with a lot of bickering and kind of nonsense that will bother you when you read about it day to day, but when you look at it from the viewpoint of history 10 or 20 years from now, you will not be that disturbed. Charlie?
Well, I agree with you about George W. Bush, and I like these nonpartisan episodes when we get together and do things. And I also think that our current problems are quite confusing. In fact, if you aren't confused, I don't think you understand it very well.
That sort of immunizes you from everything.
Well,
how bothered are you by the level of debt in relation to GDP?
well, I don't think there's any one fixed ratio that is written in the stars as required. As a matter of fact, most of the debt, as I conceive it, is not even counted in what you call debt. The off-the-books debt of the United States is bigger than the on-the-books debt. All the present value of future promises that are unfunded.
That can be changed, however.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you say can be changed, but are we really going to take Social Security away from somebody who's worked a lifetime?
Well, we
I don't think it's very likely.
No. But Social Security is not a killer, actually, in terms. If you have a GDP that rises a couple percent in real terms,
well, of course,
more in nominal terms.
That's the great problem. All of our problems are trivial if GDP will just rise at 2% per annum per capita. All these problems that the Republicans are screaming about fade into insignificance if we can do that. And but you've got to have policies that enable you to do it. And I'm not sure we always do that very well.
Okay, stay tuned.